Hey guys, I just want to make a deep apology for the lateness of this video. I've just been busy for the past couple months in particular. I've had some vacations in October and as well as, just lots of schoolwork and I've just basically had no real motivation to make videos. But now I have some time in my hand to, finally put something together. Today is the day that I start uh, with my Total Drama Alternate Universe series by first talking about the first season of Total Drama, which is obviously Total Drama Island. This is essentially a series where I'm essentially taking the universe of Total Drama, the characters, setting, and challenges, and sort of rewriting them into how I personally would have done it. Now, for the most part, when it comes to the challenges, they're pretty much going to be, the same. So, like, in Total Drama Island, it's still going to have, all the challenges, but they may play out a bit differently depending on who I decide to eliminate in which episodes. And I know that some of you are not going to agree with, how I completely rewrite this whole series or timeline or whatever, which is completely fine. With a show like this, the doors are open to lots of possibilities to how to develop the characters, especially in this season when you have 22 at your disposal. So it's going to be a bit difficult, trying to put all the characters together in this one season to sort of have some sort of development. But with all the characters that get shafted early, I do have plans for them in the future, so don't worry about that. Also, if you have not seen the original Total Drama Island season, I would highly recommend you do so, just because it would make following the season a lot easier for you, so you're not as shot in the dark about the characters and challenges. All right, without further ado, let's begin. So we're gonna just skip basically the first episode and just go right to the second episode, since the first one is essentially just the get to know everyone introductory episode. Nothing really exciting happens there. So we're just gonna go right to episode two, like I just said, which is the cliff jump and the hot tub building challenge. Now, one thing I do want to say real quick: the Katie and Izzy swap still happens, just like in Canyon, as well as the Bass going first, which means Courtney and DJ are the ones to not jump, and then the Gophers turn, and Beth is not the one to jump. So that means the Gophers get the wagons for the advantage, and because of that, they would still win the challenge pretty easily. And the Bass are set up for elimination. Then, of course, we get to the moment where Ezekiel says his little ha ha woman suck moment, which obviously gets everyone against him. Then Jeff will come in and defend him, saying, like, guys, he's homeschooled. He doesn't know any better. He's probably didn't mean to say that in an offensive way. He's been taught differently than us. We got to cut him some slack. And Ezekiel says, yeah, sorry. I wasn't trying to offend everybody. I was speaking by the facts. All the girls would still, blow him off, but Duncan would come and say, "Don't listen to them. They're just a bit mad and salty." But yeah, I agree with him. You probably shouldn't, blurt out something like that out in front of everybody. As for the elimination, since Duncan does at least have some game savvy, at least in the beginning, at first it kind of wasn't like that, but eventually as the season progresses, he does become more game savvy. He would take into consideration that at the very least Ezekiel did jump the cliff, and just because he said one bad thing, it shouldn't be enough to really prompt to vote him off necessarily. All the guys would, for the most part, be in agree with this, except for DJ, but Duncan would eventually pressure him into voting for Courtney, which is who all the guys are voting for. And then all the girls would band together to vote for Ezekiel, but that doesn't work out, so it's 6-5 vote. Courtney is eliminated. She's a bit disappointed, but understands that, she was kind of annoying everyone with all her CIT talk and just wishes everyone good luck. Bridget asks Duncan why the guys decided to side with Ezekiel, and Duncan just says that it's purely based off of first impressions, and even though he said something, that was rude, I felt like that instead we want to focus on first impressions rather than just because he said one bad thing, because he did at least jump the cliff. Bridget doesn't have too much of a counter argument too, because Duncan does make a good point, but she's still upset that most of the guys pretty much sided with Ezekiel and voted off Courtney. Episode 3 is the Awake-a-thon. So this challenge pretty much, for the most part, plays out exactly the same. Ezekiel would try to get in goods with the girls, but it doesn't really work out. He doesn't talk to Eva or Bridget, though, because Eva would just probably punch him in the face. And then Bridget's, just that kind of pretty girl that she's just anxious to talk to. Because even though Bridget was talking back to Duncan, because since Duncan had his back, he doesn't want to seem like he's immediately betraying Duncan in some sort of way. So he decides that he's just gonna ease tensions by just acting more like a team player instead. Then for the Gophers, we all know what happens here. The Heather, Lindsay, Beth alliance is formed. Heather steals Eva's MP3 player, and then Gwen still wins it for the Gophers, and Eva still gets voted off for her temper. Episode 4 is Dodgeball. Again, most part, it just plays out pretty much the exact same. Eventually, the Bass wake up Duncan to do his whole rush the new guy strategy. And I would say Jeff's to be the one to wake him up and tell him about, if you're, don't participate, you're going to go eliminated. Ezekiel would try his best to participate. I'd say at the very least he gets like one person out, like maybe Lindsay. But for the most part, he pretty much gets destroyed on the court. And then at the end, Harold clutches it for his team, thus giving the Bats the win and the Gophers are up for elimination. And it's pretty still clear that Noah gets voted off because of his snarkiness and cockiness in general. Episode 5 is the talent show. Now, there is going to be some changes here, and I'll kind of explain what happens. Now, as we all know, this is the episode where Heather steals Gwen's diary to read out in front of the whole world, but Cody's going to overhear the conversation of her talking this to Lindsay and Beth. And even though Cody has not gone on good terms with Gwen, just because he was kind of being a bit of a creep, let's just say, he doesn't want this to happen to her. However, he can't really just approach her and say that because she's probably just going to tell him to beat it, or that he's essentially lying just to try to get on her good side and whatnot. So he would have to go up to someone who is getting along with Gwen well. And thus, he goes up to Trent. He tells Trent about this, and at first Trent is a bit suspicious because, he just kind of came out of nowhere with this information. So he tells Cody, if you're lying, I can easily rearrange your face. Kind of like what he said back in episode 8. And then Cody says, well, what do I gain from lying to you? And eventually that gets Trent on board. Now, since they're guys, they can't just, waltz into the girls' cabin, obviously. So they'll have to get one of the girls to be on their side. Obviously, going up to Gwen and telling her this information might still not be a good idea, because even though, again, Trent and Gwen have gone along well so far, she was still very, stingy about her social side and wasn't really open to everybody else, so they have to find someone who's a little bit more extroverted. And thus, the choice is Lashana. Since Lashana, hates Heather just as much as, pretty much Gwen, she's all on board for fooling Heather's plan. So the idea is that Lindsay would still be guarding the door, and then Cody would, go up to her and say, hey, there's a sale on, I don't know, mascara or something. Lindsay would run off. Cody would initiate Lashana to go into the girl's cabin to get Gwen's diary, and then she would just, go hide it somewhere, I don't know, in, the woods where they can still find it. Heather won't be able to find the diary, so she actually has to do her talent this time, which is the ballet dance. Oh, and by the way, the people who still go up for the talent show are still the same. So DJ, Jeff, and eventually Harold for the Bass, and then these guys for the Gophers. And it doesn't matter because even though Heather still does a really good job with her ballet dancing, Harold still clutches it for his team, and so the Bass get the win. Now, as for the elimination, obviously now with Heather having not as much heat on her back because she never read the diary out, not everyone is going to be wanting to target her. However, she still tells Beth and Lindsay about it because even though the plan failed, they could still, if they still figure out that, let's say Heather was going to read the diary out to the whole world, that it would still put her in some hot water. So she would tell Lindsay and Beth that I wasn't actually going to say anything too embarrassing, so that she basically gets covered by these two, and then they will, the rest of the team would also follow in line with not voting her off. And because of that, it would make it a lot easier time for Justin to get voted off since, his talent was not really that good. Episode 6 is, of course, the Sucky Outdoors. Now, for this challenge, for the Gophers, it mostly plays out the same since everyone from here is canon. Gwen wouldn't be, depressed this time since her diary got never revealed to the world. And then in this, while they're also walking, Trent, Cody, and Lashana would get together. They should actually tell Gwen about this. However, because since it's still early in the game and they don't want Gwen to possibly misinterpret it as something else, they decide to keep quiet about it. As for the Bass, again, for the most part, everything plays out the same, even though it was Ezekiel being here. And since he's kind of also the country boy, he would also be kind of helpful, maybe getting food or helping pitching the tent or something. Jeff would still try to hit on Bridget, but that obviously doesn't really work out. And then because now, since Courtney's not here, Duncan would have more authority over the team. Since Courtney was really the only one who was willing to talk back to Duncan, I guess outside of also Harold a bit as well, But since Duncan, now is more feared than everyone, this puts him in a good position on the team as sort of, being the team captain or authoritarian, as you would say in confessional, because that's how he would like it, in juvie when he rules over the rest of the people. Then for the challenge, is Sadie and Katie would still get lost. I could also see Ezekiel getting lost, but I feel like he would eventually find his way back. And then Katie and Sadie still, of course, get back before everybody else. So the Gophers win, and the Bats are up for elimination. Now, because of obviously Katie and Sadie being the two targets, but only being one picked, Duncan decides that at best, it's best to get rid of Katie because, she's a little bit more athletic and was proven to be pretty decent in dodgeball. And she's a little bit more level headed as an individual, so it's just good for strategy. Harold would agree with Harold would agree with this. Tyler would just be on board to not get voted off. I would say Jeff also as well, and then of course Ezekiel because he wants to get saved. DJ would also be on the side because he doesn't want to get smack talked by Duncan. And then the three girls would probably vote for Duncan since Bridget doesn't really like that Duncan's kind of taking control over the team and kind of pushing him off to the side a little bit, not in like a rude sexist way, but just in a way that shows that it's best for strategy of him like Duncan, DJ, and Jeff to compete since they are the strongest members on the team physical wise, even though Bridget is also really good at sports. So in the end, it's a 6-3 vote, and Sadie is the one who gets eliminated this time instead of Katie. The elimination would still play out pretty much the same. However, Katie wouldn't be as teary eyed as Sadie is because again she's a little more level headed, and Bridget would go over to comfort her. She would also have a confessional saying that it's really not. She would also have a confessional saying that she really does not like how Duncan's controlling over this team and vows to get revenge for Sadie. Episode 7 is the phobia episode. They have to all face their fears. Now, this one in particular, I've had some problems with in the original, and I'll kind of explain once I get to that. So, in terms of everyone who passes from the original still does. So, Heather still passes, Beth still passes, Lindsay still passes. And then, as in terms for Katie and Ezekiel's fear, Katie's would just be the same as Sadie's, bad hair day, so she would pass pretty easily. DJ would pass. And then for Ezekiel's, it was very hard to come up with, but I decided to go with just being in like large social gatherings, so like a concert or something like that, since he's kind of like the homeschool kid. Then of course, on the Gophers, everyone else who passes. Gwen eventually passes, and then there's also a big discrepancy in this episode. Owen and Izzy do pass, but they were screaming for their lives in fear while up on the plane, but they still got the points. And when we go to Tyler, he did get in the chicken coop. He got in there, even though he was scared out of his life. He got in there, but yet he doesn't get the point, which doesn't make sense. So I'm actually going to give him the pass in this universe for that. Same thing with Cody. It's a little bit different because his fear is, defusing a time bomb, which even though he didn't do successfully, he still attempted to do. So I'm going to actually give him the pass in this universe. So the only one who fails on the Gophers is Lashana. And you might be saying, well, how is that giving an advantage to the Bats? Well, once again, with Harold, it's kind of the same situation with Cody. He eventually got the ninjas to be scared of him, but he only failed because he hit himself in the head. So that would mean to be 8-5 with the score, which means that Chris would eventually announce that there will be a tiebreaker if Ezekiel can pass his by giving them the triple points. But he tries his best, and he unfortunately caves into his fears, so the Gophers would end up winning the challenge. Duncan would still take that into consideration as at least Ezekiel trying, and as well as Jeff and DJ, because even though they're pretty emotional guys who, didn't like what Ezekiel said at the beginning of the competition, they would definitely start to understand that Ezekiel is a lot stronger than they initially thought. And then in terms of who gets eliminated, it's unfortunately Tyler. He's just very clumsy and weak, and even though he passed, it's just kind of unfortunate that he just gets voted off here. And it's even more sucks because he actually, passed his time instead of actually, failing miserably. Episode 8 is, of course, not the Sucky Outdoors. This is Up the Creek, so they go to Boney Island. Now, in this episode, this is obviously where we have that big moment between Cody and Gwen. But since Cody has wanted to, give Gwen her space because, he was a bit of a creep to him, he doesn't really want to go on the same boat with her. But Lindsay and Beth would still drag Trent on there. So Gwen would still tell him that, it's fine and that as long as she doesn't do anything stupid. and whatnot. And because now that Cody's not trying to impress her this time, he would not like, tell her like, "Oh, hey, I got this," like pulling the boat all in by himself. He would actually, let her get help from Gwen on this challenge. Now, as for, the other people who go with each other, it doesn't really matter too much. It would just for the most part be the same. And then because Cody and Gwen's interaction is just, pretty much the big focal factor in this one, and since Cody is most part, not really talking to Gwen, Gwen would be a bit shocked that Cody hasn't said anything and ask him, hey, you're being so quiet. What's with the, not talking and whatnot? And Cody just says, well, he just feels really bad for making her uncomfortable in the first few days and just wants to give her space because, he doesn't want to make her uncomfortable anymore. Gwen says that's really sweet and that maybe he does a bit harsh to him because, not every person has the best social skills and whatnot. And Cody says it's fine that regardless of what he did, he still shouldn't have done that or not. And they both end up making up. And then that's, of course, when Cody does the whole, bribery thing for Gwen's you know what. And they would still, have that little interaction that plays out the same. Then for the fire building challenge, Izzy would still, win it for her team with the little fire explosive thing. So they get the head start. Cody eventually gets Trent and Gwen on the same boat. But it doesn't matter what happens because DJ still pushes all the boats back to the island first, so the Bats get the win and the Gophers lose. And Izzy still gets chased down by the military. Episode 9 is the Paintball Deer Hunter episode. Now, as we all know, this is the one where Cody gets mauled by the bear. This time that won't happen because it was really just there so that Heather can get some plot armor. I'm trying to give her as less plot armor in this universe as possible since it was pretty prevalent that she had lots of plot armor in this first season. So Cody would not would still follow Beth back to Heather, but then he would eventually go off and do his own thing. And since he's pretty good at just staying quiet and being evasive, he would be a pretty good deer. Same thing with Tread, same thing with Gwen. The girls would still eventually have their little fight, which eventually helps Bass, get the advantage. And since Chris still calls the challenge for them, just being, rowdy and just not following orders of the challenge, he would still, think it's cool because, it obviously is good for ratings. But because since the Gophers, still had that little fight, and even though Cody's no longer injured, the Bats would still get the win. And as for who gets voted off, obviously Heather is the big target here, and Beth is no longer on her side, so it's just Lindsay and Heather. However, in an interesting twist, Cody will go up to Heather and say, hey, I actually want to keep you in this game. The reason being is that what Cody is saying in confessional states that as much as he still hates Heather's guts, keeping someone that is very much a big target in the game would help keep him less off target, off his back, because definitely out of everyone that's on his team, he's definitely the biggest outcast. And when it comes down to the vote, he's not as confident of him being saved if it came down to one. So by keeping Heather in the game, everyone would have a constant target on their back. So Heather would ask how Cody would help this out, and Cody would just say that, it's not going to be easy just to convince everybody, but he'll find a more subtle way to do it, because even though she's, kind of mean, she does have some talent and some skills that are actually worthy to the team. Which Heather has a confessional saying that it's finally nice to know that someone has some brains, even though Cody's still a little twerp. Eventually, Cody would figure out the way to get someone eliminated instead of Heather, and as we all know in the last episode, Beth brought back the Tiki doll, and, well, that's what still happened. Cody would point it out. Chris would, say, like, ooh, it's cursed and whatnot. And then that eventually gets everyone prompt to vote off Beth. It's a bit sucks that, Cody had to do that, but it was in his best interest for the game. Oops. Episode 10 is, of course, the episode where Hell's Kitchen, the cooking episode. And this one, the head chefs are basically going to be the same, so you still got Heather and then Jeff for the Bass. Now, this time with Cody actually being here, I would say that he would actually be a good distraction for Owen, since they get along pretty well, and Cody will be smart enough to tell Owen, like, hey, don't eat these, these are for, the actual food. I can give you some leftovers and stuff like that. Heather would still force Owen to go get her purse, and then would still get locked up in the freezer by, Lashana, Gwen, and, Lindsay and all that people, just, because she was just being a bitch. So the Bass would still ultimately win, even though Lashana's ribs were really good, because the flamboy that, Lindsay still absolutely fucked up would still suck. So the Bass would still win, and the Gophers are up for elimination. And then as for this one, it's definitely tough to say considering that, Heather's obviously still a big target, but obviously Cody wants to, keep her in the game. So, in terms of what happens with the vote, these three would probably vote for Owen since he's kind of a bit of a liability. And these three would vote for Heather, which would result in a tie because Owen would obviously not vote for himself. I could see him potentially voting for like maybe Heather, but I feel like Heather would convince him last second because he's just so gullible. So he would probably vote for, I don't know, Trent or something like that. So it goes to a tie between Heather and Owen. And of course, there is no real tiebreaker in the entirety of Island, so it's really hard to say. But I'm just going to say that it's just going to be just some random challenge, maybe like the fire building one that they usually use in Survivor. And Heather would pretty much easily win this, and Owen is unfortunately gone. Cody is once again sad that he has to eliminate another one of his friends that he got along pretty well with. But again, it's all a part of the game because he still wants to win. Episode 11 is the Who Can You Trust episode, so the one where they have to do all the trust challenges. Gwen and Heather still compete in the first one since they're still here from Canyon, and Gwen would still win despite Heather doing that, pulling off her skirt, I guess, to reveal what, and they would still win that first part. Then for the second part, it's Jeff and Bridget, and then Trent and Lindsay competing, and that would still play out exactly the same. Except this time, I'm gonna make it so that Trent doesn't eat it. Like Chris would call out and say, like, "Yeah, Lindsay fucked up really bad, so we're not gonna have you eat that shit," because it was kind of messed up that happened in general. So the Bass would still get the second point. The third point is obviously the one with the apples. So this one would be a little bit different. I'm gonna say Ezekiel would be the one. Actually, no, Katie would be the one shooting this time instead of Sadie, and then maybe it's like I don't know, Harold the one who volunteers for the apples. And then since Owen's not here, I'd say maybe Cody volunteers. And then Lashana still manages to hit the apple or the arrow first, so she would get her team the third point. Then there's the trust fall challenge. Lindsay still screws it up with Heather, and then Harold and Bridget still succeed in this challenge, so they get the second point, which goes to the tiebreaker, which is of course the blindfolded sled race. Now, as we all know, this is the episode where Duncan Go gets Bunny for DJ, and I would say he still does that, even though with Courtney not being here, because people like Jeff and Bridget are still here, and DJ's just in general someone that Duncan likes as a friend, and he doesn't want, of course, DJ to have to suffer, and just it would just be a kind gesture thing to do. After Bridget sees Duncan give Bunny to DJ, Bridget would confess saying that she still doesn't like Duncan, but really appreciates what Duncan did for DJ, as that was sweet. DJ still would take off the blindfolds, so that would still screw over his team, so the Gophers would end up winning. Then for the elimination, it's pretty obviously Katie since she screwed up. Because even though Ezekiel, once again, was not really well liked by everyone, it's not like he did anything wrong this episode, so no real point in voting him off here. Episode 12 is the is this the extreme sport? No, this is the one with Chef, the one that Chef does all the military training one. This one pretty much just plays out for the same. Cody will not do well in the physical challenges, but he would do well in, let's say, like the essay portion. Since Courtney's not here, Duncan, no one would go looking after Duncan, and when he goes sent to the boathouse, and then it doesn't matter in the end. Gwen still wins it for her team, so ultimately the Bass are set up for elimination once again. Now, as we all know, this is the episode where Harold rigs the votes, and even though Courtney's no longer here, he would still rig it against somebody because these people have just been picking on him a lot, and he's just sick and tired of it. So who would be the people who he would eliminate instead since Courtney's not here? Well, the three options are Duncan, Bridget, and Ezekiel. Duncan is, well, obvious. Bridget is because he just doesn't have any other options left. And Ezekiel because, no one really likes him, so maybe, screwing him over wouldn't be as bad in the grand scheme of things. He obviously doesn't choose Bridget since Bridget's been particularly the nicest to him on the team. And even though he's gone along with Ezekiel, no one really likes him still. And at this point, having him go home here would probably not be the worst case scenario. So he rigs the votes against Ezekiel. Duncan, DJ, and Jeff would still, protest about this, But when they figure out that it was Ezekiel who got screwed over, they don't mind it as much because, he was still kind of a pile of crap for all the crap he said. Episode 13 is the one where they have to. This is now the Extreme Sports Challenge. DJ would still win the Skydiving Challenge. Lashana still wins the Moose Riding Challenge, so it goes to the tiebreaker. And obviously, we know what happens here. Heather's little distraction gets Harold, and then Lindsay still wins it for her team when Duncan tried to sabotage, so the Gophers once again win. And it doesn't matter. Harold's still getting voted off like before, and then the whole letter thing still happens between Lashana and Harold. Now we've technically arrived at the merge with episode 14, but this one's a non-elimination challenge because it's the Runch of Disgustingness. So we'll just do this for now. We'll just get all the girls on the Gopher side and then all the guys on the Bass side. So for this challenge, this is obviously going to be a massive disadvantage for the guys because Owen's no longer here. And with Cody, the thing with Cody is that it's really hard to say how well he would do in this challenge because even though he didn't eat the donkey in World Tour because the donkey saved him from Sierra, it's really hard to say like how exactly he would do in this challenge because he never actually really has eaten anything. But I feel like just from the get-go, he's not going to do very well in this challenge. I don't think the worst, but he's particularly going to be probably the worst on his team. Now, for the first round, which is the quote-unquote meatballs, I still think that the girls are still going to win this challenge. But I would say that Cody would be the one to willing to eat it because, he obviously wants to prove that he is just as strong as everybody else. However, I feel like Duncan and the guys would ridicule him, especially like, these three, the Bass guys, just because, they were like, dude, that's your own brother, and how can you do that? And then, Trent tries to tell him, like, hey, don't listen to them. They're just trying to get under your skin and trying to make you look like the fault guy. The second round, the guys would win. The third round, guys win. Fourth round, girls win. And then they still have to go to the tiebreaker with the cockroaches because of, DJ and Bridget. In terms of the tiebreaker, Lashana still goes up for the girls, and I think the guys would shove Cody up there just because, if Cody loses the challenge for them, then eventually Duncan can maybe convince Trent to, leave Cody alone and that he's just a weakling and that you should come hang out with us and whatnot. But also because if Cody, if Cody were to end up winning the challenge, then it'd be like a massive surprise. But realistically, it's just that, if Cody loses, Duncan be like, well, at least we can't blame, these three. Since they have the majority of the Bass guys, this would obviously give them an advantage. And if they can convince Trent to switch sides, then Cody would be all by himself, and he would probably pathetically go up to the girls, and that's how he can get voted off. Since even though Duncan doesn't really, like Cody, he does at least recognize that Cody is pretty smart, and something like that could be a threat in the merge. And as for the challenge, it really is not that hard to decide. Lashana would win, probably not by a metric crap ton. I say maybe like 2 shots or something, since she did begin to slow down towards the end, and so the girls would get the cruise ship. Duncan would obviously ridicule Cody for screwing over the challenge and whatnot, and then that kind of that gets Trent to kind of look at him and be like, Cody, you're a pretty chill dude, but you kind of suck at these challenges. Which obviously, gets Cody pretty infuriated and kind of kills his ego a little bit. So he kind of does like a little walk of shame around the island and whatnot. And now we have arrived at the merge. So now being at the merge, we obviously now have Eva and Izzy coming back. The girls would come back from their vacation little thing, all ecstatic and whatnot. The guys wouldn't be as jealous because they were able to find some fun. Obviously, Cody would be pretty much all by himself since Trent left him. Trent does feel a little bit bad, as he says in confessional, but the guys are right. Because now we're getting deeper into the game, it's more focused on, building certain other alliances and probably just leaving Cody in the dust to just, not really as someone who he could maybe continue through the game since he's not the best at challenges. So this one is the no pain, no gain challenge. And in terms of, what happens, I'd say it pretty much plays out exactly the same since the only person that's not here is Owen from Original, so Cody is here instead. I would say he gets past one pain challenge, but then like the second one is where he bails. Maybe it's something like stupid and funny, like with Gwen with the whole age music one. It'd be something stupid and silly like that one. And then eventually it comes down to Lashana and Eva, which Lashana still wins. And since no one really still likes Eva for her temper, she still gets voted off, just like in the original. All right, episode 16. This is the pirate one where they have to find the stupid keys and whatnot. So everyone would still get the same clue, except for Cody. He'll just get Owen's clue, which is the one with the bear, which is a little ironic. And he would pretty much get it, I would say, pretty easily since he's smart. He can figure that out. And after that, he would, kind of go back to the cabin and just kind of chill. And then he would actually catch Heather delivering a letter to the cabin and dropping it off. He goes over to inspect what's going on and sees that a letter has been dropped on Trent's bed, which says from Gwen. However, because since it was delivered by Heather, he finds it really, really suspicious. So he goes up to Trent to alert him about this information. Trent is a bit excited at first, but Cody tells him that it's probably not best to read it or to tie into it because I saw that it was that it was dropped off by Heather, and why the heck would Gwen get Heather to drop off a letter for her? That just doesn't make any sense. And Trent 100% agrees with this, so they go up to Gwen and ask if she actually wrote a letter. To which she replies, no, and that's not even my handwriting. So obviously they know that at this point someone's trying to set Trent up. But they still go investigate, where the letter was going to lead them to, which is over by the dock, just to see what would happen, what was going to happen. And that's, of course, when we see Heather crying on the little dock side. And Cody just tells them, see, I don't trust it. She's just trying to set you up into some bull crap. And Trent agrees, and they kind of just both go off and just do their own thing. So Heather, in the end, doesn't end up kissing Trent thanks to Cody, which she is a bit mad that Cody is, kind of starting to go on the sides of, Trent and Gwen. But because since it's the merge at this point, now she has to play a little bit differently. And she feels like that even though this plan failed, she still has so many options for alliances and just to screw with people in general. So now that the Heather doesn't have that heat on her back now for screwing over Trent, she would still get immunity though because of just bullshit. So in terms of who gets eliminated now, it would just be Izzy because everyone just thinks she's psycho and that no one really thinks that she's the greatest person ever, which I know kind of makes it pointless that I just brought back the two people who were just brought back from the merge and then I just eliminated them. But realistically, that's just what would happen. Episode 17 is hide and seek. In terms of who would do really well in this challenge, Lashana still would easily dominate because she had a really good hiding spot. I would say Cody also does pretty good because of his small body. He can definitely be very evasive around Chef. DJ would still go hide on the roof like what he did originally. And what's also interesting in this episode is that Heather and Lindsay found Owen and DJ on the roof after they both caved into the mess hall. So they both could have easily turned in one of the two to get immunity, but Heather basically told Lindsay not to because it was just for her to be essentially a bitch. But now, because it's only DJ, this would make more sense for Heather to tell Lindsay that I'm bringing back DJ to go find someone else. Lindsay would have a confessional saying that now she's starting to have doubts that Heather is actually on her side. Then everyone would still get, caught in their same hiding spots. So, in the end, Lashana, Heather, and I'm actually going to give immunity to Cody because he would just, I feel like he would have a really good hiding spot. I could also see him getting caught, but I'm going to say he gets this one win to himself, which helps boost his ego after, of course, the previous events of the last, couple weeks or so. And then as for the elimination, this is where it gets a little bit tricky since obviously, people like Duncan are a major threat. Heather obviously has got immunity, so she can't be voted off. So the guys would still rally. I forgot to mention the guys' alliance would also form in this episode, just like in the original. Let's get the Golden Girls over here. So they would still form the alliance, and they would still agree to vote Bridget off, except for, of course, Jeff. But he still puts his hand in, but, obviously he's not going to do that, and I'll get to that in a little bit. The girls would all decide to collectively just vote off Duncan because he's just kind of mean, obviously led by Bridget. And thus, the votes are 6-4. Originally, perceived to be 5-5 by Duncan, but it's 6-4 against Duncan, and Duncan's eliminated. He's obviously infuriated because that means one of the guys had flipped, but before he could figure it out, he's dragged away by Chef. Bridget in confessional would be cheering that she finally got her revenge on Duncan, and that sometimes being the authoritarian bad boy figure doesn't always get you the win. Now, in terms of figuring out whose bike they get to, it's really just very convoluted and complicated, so I'm not going to decide that. But in terms of like, people who are still here, like they'll still get each other's bikes. For Trent, Cody, and Bridget's performance in the challenges, Cody and Trent would do well because Trent has had an interest in motorcycles, and Cody's smart, so he'll be able to figure it out. And then Bridget, she's kind of clumsy, she wouldn't be able to do a good job at it. In terms of who does crosses the finish line, excuse me, for the final part of the race, it'll be Lindsay, Heather, Trent, and Cody. So they will compete in the final race, and Trent and Cody would still like wipe out. But this time, Chris is not going to do the BS rules because that rule was essentially BS. So instead, Heather just gets immunity after Lindsay was essentially used by Heather. Lindsay would figure this out, but Heather would say, sorry, not sorry, whatnot. But, Lindsay instead would not get eliminated right from the start, so she still has a chance of, actually continuing forward in the game. As for the elimination, this is where it gets, again, once again, tricky because Heather is obviously still here. She has immunity. So Cody goes up to her and discusses what they should do in this situation. Because now Lindsay is presumably not on their side anymore. Cody says that it's probably best to maybe get Jeff and Bridget involved since they're not too focused on the game. And if you could maybe bring them to the finale since they're one of the only power couples remaining. Like, yeah, sure, Trent and Gwen are still here, but there's definitely, still very game savvy, unlike Jeff and Bridget. So it's probably a good idea to get them on your side. And Heather says that's a really good idea since they don't really care too much about the game and just would rather spend time together. So that's what happens. Heather goes up to Jeff and Bridget and does eventually convince them that, Trent and Gwen are out to get them and that as well as Lashana since they are a power couple and that's obviously seen as a threat for the game. And she's just doing this to, save them from possible elimination. And then as for the votes, it's going to be pretty close and kind of hard to really say. Trent, DJ, these four in particular would vote for Heather. Lindsay, I would say, is also going to vote for Heather. But at the last second, Cody would probably convince either Lindsay or Trent to vote on their side. Probably Trent since they've gone along with each other well. And says like, hey, I've overheard that like Lindsay's trying to get you out and thinks that like you and Gwen are just like a tacky couple or whatnot. And Trent would get, kind of offended by this and he would vote for Lindsay, which means that it would result in a 5-vote for Lindsay with these people, 4 votes against Heather, or not Heather, she has immunity. I completely messed up. I forgot that she has immunity, and I just said that they would all vote for Heather. Instead, they would vote for Cody just because he's kind of the only option at this point since, all these guys like each other, which again was, why Cody wanted to keep Heather in the game because, when it came down to a vote, he was more than likely screwed. So that's why he wanted to get Trent on his side, which he would do last second. So it's 5 votes against Lindsay, 4 votes against Cody. Lindsay is eliminated. Everyone's a bit shocked by this, and so is Lindsay. And then Heather, teases her a little bit, and then that's, of course, when Lindsay cusses her out and goes off on her like she did in the original. And everyone has a good laugh about it. Cody, once again, feels pretty bad, but, again, it's all in for the game. But now the guilt is starting to get to his head a lot. Episode 19 is the Hook, Line, Screamer Challenge. So this is the one where they have to deal with the horror movie one. This one, pretty much, there's not much change. Gwen would still, win just by default for kind of bullshit. And then DJ would still get voted off because of how much of a scaredy cat he is. So episode 20 is the one where they have to catch the animals. In terms of everyone who was still here from Camden, they would still get all the same animals. So Lashana still gets the frog. Gwen still gets the duck. He gets the beaver. She gets the bear. And then these 3, I don't think it really matters too much. Trent, I don't think would do really good in this challenge whatsoever. But Cody is smart, so he'll figure it out. And then Bridge is just naturally good with people and with animals and nature, so she would do it. I still think Gwen would still get there first followed by Bridget, then Cody, Lashana, and then Jeff, and then these two would not be able to finish because with Heather it's a freaking bear, and no one is really going to be left up to help her. Again, Cody does not want to be seen working with Heather because that kind of alludes to his plan. I kind of forgot to mention that, but whatever. So in terms of the elimination, this is where it gets again tough to say because now that Helen Hunter has immunity that she is pretty much free reign to get rid of. But again, Cody's strategy is keeping Heather in the game. So he goes up to Heather and says, "Okay, who should we eliminate?" And Heather says it's definitely a tough call, but it's got to be Trent. Cody asks why Trent and says that, well, Trent is, getting along with everybody. I'd see that as a threat, and no one's going to want to vote off Lashana, Jeff, or Bridget because they're just, too likable. Cody kind of protests against this because, Trent's obviously his friend, but then Heather claps back at him saying, well, it's either you or him. And Cody obviously wants to stay in the game to win, so sadly he has to make a tough decision. Jeff and Bridget would still be on Heather's side because of what she said about bringing them to the finale, for them being the only power couple, with Trent and Gwen being a threat to them. So it's 4 votes for Trent, 3 votes for Heather. Trent is eliminated. It's very shocking once again, and Trent says that how this is possible. I thought I was getting along with everybody. And then that's when eventually Trent and Gwen and Lashana realize that Cody has flipped his vote in favor of Heather. They obviously get super mad at him, but Heather would tell them to back off of Cody and that he's just playing the game and that they should have seen this coming. We can't just, have our friendships for so long and just that's just how the game works and whatnot. Cody in confessional would state that he's glad to be defended by Heather, but at what cost? The next episode is the triathlon challenge with the 3 arms. For the teams, it'll be Heather versus Lashana since they don't get along. Jeff and Gwen would still be a team just like in the original, which means Bridget and Cody are still in the team. Bridget is a bit awkward around Cody because, he's still kind of a bit of a weirdo, even though his weirdo tensions have definitely, died down a lot as the seasons progress. She definitely still feels awkward being, his teammate, and as well as Cody. In terms of the eating challenge, Cody would volunteer to eat because he understands that Bridget is vegan, and he's not going to do it to impress her because he knows that he's just here to win the challenge. Bridget in confession was saying that's a pretty shocking to hear from Cody and that he actually might be changing for the better. And then in terms of who wins, it's going to be Heather and Lashana. They're just the better two. They're pretty much the best when it comes to the eating challenges, so they would still win and get the first point. For the second challenge is the one where they had to return the tiki doll portion. Heather and Lashana would just be bickering and arguing the whole time. Jeff and Gwen would be, chill. They would still have their little development. And then Bridget and Cody is the big kind of one since they're obviously 2 different people. Cody was once again remains pretty much silent throughout the boat ride. And Bridget would ask, kind of the same thing that Gwen said, back in episode 8. You've been so quiet. You usually like to talk to people. It's kind of shocking seeing you so, like this and kind of down this morning, like, what's up? And Cody just says he feels, really bad for, all the stuff that he's done for, getting Lindsay eliminated, Trent eliminated, Owen eliminated. He feels like that, for the most part, he's thrown away friendships that he could potentially had just for, a small, dose of cash, which is, only $100,000 in this season. And he just says that he just wants to win as much as everybody else, because he's had a bit of a hard life with his parents. Not anything like abusive or anything. They just kind of neglect him and kind of just leave him to do his own thing. They would still take care of him and whatnot, but they would essentially just do the basic needs and call it a day. Again, this is not really confirmed in the actual wiki, but we do know that Cody doesn't really have it best with his parents with the whole missing his birthday situation in World Tour. So I feel like something like that would still happen, but not enough to a point where it's full-on child abuse. Bridget would feel bad because she is kind of like an empathist, and that she also joined the show mostly to meet people because working at the Surf Shack alone all summer has just been really boring, and she wanted to get out and actually, meet some people. Cody says he wanted to do the same, but he also wants to win, and, just trying to balance both of those is just very, very difficult, and he feels like he shouldn't be here. Bridget says to not beat himself up and that he's just doing his best, and that at the end of the day he is right, this is a game, but it is important that you should take in those friendships. Cody says, "Am I really a bad person?" And Bridget says, "You're not. You're just trying to figure things out." Cody immensely thanks Bridget for the advice, and they continue moving forward with the challenge. However, Jeff and Gwen would have finished this part already, so they would get the second point. Then for the final part, Gwen and Jeff would struggle, and then Heather and Lashana would still bicker and argue, and then Lashana would want to, ask for the win key, and Bridget and Cody would easily dominate this challenge, so anyone can get voted off tonight. In terms of the elimination before the person can get voted off, which is presumably going to be Jeff in this situation, thanks to Heather, Cody stands up and declares he's quitting the game. He feels like what he has just done to the game is not right. He just feels really bad for what he has done, and he just can't put himself to vote off someone who gave him. He can't just vote someone off of the person who gave him a lot of advice too. Basically, what I mean by that is that he just can't bring himself to vote off Jeff, considering all the advice that Bridget gave him, and he would just feel really bad for once again, betraying someone that gave him some really good advice that he bonded well with. Lashana and Gwen would eventually apologize to Cody about getting in his face about Trent and saying that it's right, it is all a game after all. And Cody says it's fine, that he's sure to patch up things with Trent, and that he hopes he understands that. And Gwen and Lashana would say that yeah, he surely does. Before Cody gets sent away, Heather would still tell Cody that, well, you could have had a chance to go to the final two with me, possibly even share the prize with me, but you blew it. And Cody says, well, at least I'm walking out of here with friends unlike you, which kind of has a nice little final blow to Heather as Cody finally walks onto the boat and is now gone. All right, episode 22. As we all know, this is the one where someone gets the bullshit, and unfortunately, it's gonna be Bridget. I just don't see, much else I can do with her at this point, and I feel like most people would like her because even though I think Jeff would also be a viable option for people to say, but I'm gonna say it's Bridget, considering that Jeff is just more likable and people would want him to stay in the game. With people accidentally saying Bridget's name to bring her back, I know it could have also eliminated Lashana, but having like a power couple like this would just be, I feel like, unfair because it's basically three against one almost in a way. So getting rid of Bridget here would I think would be the best option, at least for these final four. So episode 23, this is the one where they all get lost in like the woods and whatnot, and this one basically just doesn't matter what happens because it's essentially just not really a reward challenge, just nothing happens, so there's no real point in talking about this one. But episode 24 is because that's the one where they get left by Chef and Chris in the woods, and they have to find their way back to camp. Gwen and Heather would still be a team, and then Jeff and Lashana would be the team since they're the only two left. And in terms of who would do better, I would say Heather and Gwen still win this challenge pretty decisively, since Jeff doesn't have the best memory, and that again he's not the most game savvy whatsoever. Lashana would get a little bit upset, but it's not too big of a deal because it is Jeff. He is a pretty likable person. Now, in terms of who gets eliminated, this is the one where Chef is the one who votes someone off here. So it's kind of hard to say because usually he voted someone off who had some sort of beef with him, like Duncan. And I finally figured out who would get picked off by Chef in this episode. It's Lashana. The reason being because back in episode 19, she went into the kitchen to get some food during the horror movie challenge, and Chef obviously doesn't like it when you go into his kitchen, so he would take that to consideration and vote Lashana off. It is kind of bullcrap, but it is what it is, pretty much. Episode 25, this is the I Triple Dog Dare You. This episode pretty much just plays out relatively the same as in the original, except that Jeff is here instead. He would still get pretty lucky, like Owen not getting like the worst scares whatsoever, and Gwen and Jeff would still eventually team up on Heather, and she finally gets eliminated in this episode just like before. And now we have arrived at the finale, which is between Gwen and Jeff. With this one, this could really go either way because even though Jeff's not a very game savvy person, he has proven to have some competitiveness in the challenges. But in terms of who I would say will win this season canonically, I decided to give it to Jeff because he's just very likable. Since that was kind of the same thing with Owen, even though he wasn't very game savvy, he was very popular with everybody, and it just would make sense to have a very popular character win. With Gwen obviously getting the runner-up spot, and then you can do the whole alternate universe thing with Gwen winning and then Jeff being the runner up. For Gwen's victory, it'll pretty much be the exact same as it was in the alternate ending, and then Jeff would hug her and congratulate her for winning. And then for Jeff's, it would pretty much be relatively the same as Owen's, and Gwen wouldn't be too upset, and because she now respects Jeff and has a friend and whatnot. And that's pretty much it. So again, I'm really sorry for this video for being so long, and I'm sorry if there was like a couple slurs. I was trying to read off a script and also like notes and stuff like that. Not a script. It was a bunch of notes, and just kind of trying to follow along that way. So I might do something different for when I do action. But I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Drop a like if you can and subscribe as it helps out the channel. I'll talk to you guys later.